A desire to start Tactivate came from our experience, in working with military veterans and working in the disaster response realm and in kind of the startup ecosystem. We saw veterans coming home and quite frankly, we were losing a lot of people to suicide. And the demographic in particular is incredibly talented. They've got more EQ and situational awareness and a work ethic that's unparalleled. Because we had worked with the community, we understood that, understood how to tap into that, how to work with that. And on the other side, business has always been our passion. Entrepreneurship, starting these crazy ventures. And so we fused all of those worlds. We started working with veterans to launch one-off companies, and we took that cash flow and we were able to sponsor all kinds of disaster response operations all around the world. When you drop into a disaster zone, you don't know the language, you don't know the country, you don't know the people, the flow, the game. You've got to build capacity very quickly in order to save lives. It's the same thing as launching a business. Puerto Rico is a really unique beast because of its territorial status. The typical aid system wasn't necessarily designed to handle this kind of response effectively. The biggest issue is people have a very strong misconception of FEMA and what FEMA is structured and capable of doing. And when the organization showed up, they're typically a funding resource and an advisory agency that gets behind local government to provide resources and support, but they don't do any kind of last mile work whatsoever, with the exception of search and rescue. So there's a lot of people on the island who are waiting for FEMA to take action, when in point of fact, FEMA could do very little because they can only sit behind the local government. So the first thing that I did when I got down here is I literally got into a Jeep, picked a spot on the map that looked the most remote, and I put a pin and I drove out there. And I spent the whole day just driving around the mountains, talking to people. The one thing that I realized that was very tangible was there's a lot of local stores or pandarias where they sell bread and water and meat that were on generator. They had tons of food on the shelves, they had tons of bottled water, but there was absolutely no connectivity. So all of these local merchants who had very little cash reserves, if any, before the storm, had done all they could to serve their community. And of course, they were giving out food and doing what they could to help, but they couldn't continue to pay their employees. They couldn't keep gas in their generator. They couldn't resupply because they had no money because there was no purchasing power. The narrative and what the aid agencies and the government and the media were covering was there's a huge food and water problem in Puerto Rico. We need to ship tons of pallets of water and tons of food onto the island, when in actuality, it was a connectivity issue because food and water was in point of fact in the most needed areas, but no one could get access to it because the merchants didn't have selling power and the community didn't have any purchasing power. So we figured we could solve the problem if we could bring these people's point of sale systems back online. We went around to try to socialize the challenge to the government, to the military, and I would say, oh my God, that's a huge issue. And because of bureaucracies, and again, that's not a slight, it's just the reality, it takes time to process things, right? Nothing was happening. And this was an acute food security issue, so action had to be taken. So we said, okay, well, we can action on this quickly. So we put together a working group and went around, and within a week and a half, 2 weeks, we had 8 or 9 systems up and running. The local merchants were selling, the local economy was being stimulated, there was local resources being utilized to solve an acute problem, and the dependency was less on external aid. People can look at the aid system in FEMA and the government and they can say all day long how corrupt or inefficient it is, and certainly there's challenges. But again, our philosophy is, if you can navigate the NGO community, if you can navigate government, if you can navigate federal, FEMA, or the UN, whatever the case may be, there's tremendous resources you can pull from every community. What we've seen in Puerto Rico and we saw in Haiti and we saw in Philippines is when we got things done, it was because we brought resource communities together that are typically very isolated and siloed. So we stood up Tactivate, one, to apply to international disasters, to get in very quickly, to bring subject matter experts, special operations veterans, satellite communications guys, medics, and to get very last mile very quickly to kind of change the way aid was done. We get out into the local community, we try to understand the true underlying systemic challenges that are plaguing a population from recovering quickly, and we get behind them to try to empower local resources.